Hey there, writer rebels. So you wrote a book and you published it and it flopped. What are you supposed to do now? Join me today as I talk about the next steps after you have a bad release. Hey there everyone, it's me, Scarlett Kol, young adult author, YouTuber, and storyteller, and I'm here today to talk about when your book flops. It happens. It does happen that you've put your heart and soul into a book, and maybe it's your first book, maybe it's your fifth book, maybe it's your 50th book, and you put it out and it just doesn't take off. It happens, and it happens probably more likely than it's not going to happen. So what are you supposed to do at that point? Today we're going to talk about some things that you can do and some things you definitely shouldn't do if your book flops. But before we get into those, I did want to say thank you so much to everybody who keeps coming back to my channel. I adore my subscribers, and I really, really appreciate the ones that keep coming back week after week and leaving fantastic comments on all my videos. If you are not a subscriber, it's really easy to do. Just make sure you're hitting that subscription bar and the notification bell below this video, and they will let you know, they being YouTube, every time I put out a new video, which is typically on Thursdays. If you also want to hit that like button while you're down there, that would also be great because it's going to let YouTube know that this is a video worth watching. So, book flops, they happen. They've happened to me. They may happen to you. I do wish everyone out there is going to have enormous success and everything that they release is just going to fly up the charts and do phenomenally. That isn't necessarily going to be the case though, and more often than not, it's probably not going to be the case. So what are you supposed to do when your book flops? Well, there's definitely some steps that you can take, and I'm going to go through those, as well as towards the end of the video, I'm going to talk about 3 things you should definitely not do if your book flops. Number 1 is give it some time. Sometimes it takes a little while to get some momentum for your book. Just because you have just put it out and you didn't have the best release day or release week, there is an opportunity for that book to pick up steam as you do other marketing things, as you talk more about your book, as readers get to read it and put up reviews and all of that great stuff. So there is an opportunity for your book to start to gain momentum after it's been released. Obviously, new releases are flashy and they're going to draw more attention. However, if a trend changes in your favor or something like that, you could definitely find a second life for this book later on down the road. We are not in the old days of publishing where a book goes out of print unless we choose to do that in a self-publishing realm. As long as you're alive or have somebody who can control this book and deal with the back end of it, it can definitely stay in print and can keep finding new readers over and over and over again. So just because you had a bad release doesn't mean that's going to curse the book for its entire life. So give it a little bit of time and see if some of those seeds you've planted start to grow. If not, there's definitely other opportunities to make changes, but give yourself a little bit of a break. Just because you had a bad launch week is not the end of the world. Number 2, realize you are not alone in this. Almost every author out there has probably had a flop book, or one they would consider not as successful as the others. Even authors that are consistently hitting lists and selling thousands and thousands of books have books that do not perform as well as other books. They have series that do not perform as well as their best-selling series. Obviously, everything cannot perform at the exact same level all the time, and if they are, great for those authors. But for the most part, there is going to be ebbs and flows in everything you release. So realizing that it happens to everyone, and it's going to happen to everyone and could possibly happen to you if it hasn't already, is one of the first steps of just accepting that this is okay. If you are a brand new author, it may be really hard to gain traction, especially in very saturated markets. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody's read your work. They have no idea what to expect going into your work. You have no backlist to go off of. So it is quite possible that your first book is not going to do so well. It is nice to have that new shiny author smell, and that can definitely help you, but in a lot of cases, first books just do okay. And you know what? That's going to be all right, because everybody has to start somewhere and you start building from the bottom up. But you have to get that first book out, and sometimes it's not going to go the way you expect it to go. Especially if you go into your first book with dreams of making millions and being the next J.K. Rowling. The probability of that happening is pretty small, so if you temper your expectations a little bit, you'll probably be a little bit happier. However, that's another topic for a whole other video. The third thing you want to do is kind of analyze why you think that the book has flopped. There are instances where you can have a perfect book with an ideal cover, a totally catchy blurb, and it's still not going to take off. It doesn't matter. There are things that sometimes they just don't work, and it doesn't matter who you are as an author. It doesn't matter how good of a quality book that you have out there. Sometimes it just doesn't work. I'm sure we've all seen books out there that we've read and went, how is this popular? Why is it selling so many copies? It's not even well written. There are those that take off. Sometimes it's lightning in a bottle and they just get that opportunity. And sometimes really great books get passed over for one reason or another, or maybe it's too close to something else that's already hitting bad circumstances, bad timing. Maybe you released it at the beginning of a pandemic and people weren't buying books. You never know what those circumstances are going to be. But if you can sit down and try to analyze and see if there's anything that you know isn't working about your book, this can give you concrete steps as to where you want to go with this. A good thing is also to get feedback. If you haven't gotten feedback on your book prior to it being published, normally you would have an editor or at least beta readers or somebody going through it. So hopefully you have had some feedback beforehand, but now that the finished product is out there, maybe it's time to reach out for a little bit more feedback. Maybe you have readers, if you are an established author, that have been reading your stuff for a while, and you can ask them as to, this series doesn't seem to be taking off. Why do we like this one more than we like this one? And try to get some of that feedback. Maybe there's other people you can give the book to. If you're starting to get reviews, what are those reviews saying? I'm not a big proponent of reading your reviews because that can really dampen your day. But if you're trying to figure out why things aren't working, it might be a good place to go. Some people can be very harsh and critical online, but they also might be a little bit more brutally honest with you than, say, your friends or family. So if you're really, really concerned about your book not doing as well as you expect it to do, try and figure out what it is that's holding that book back. Is it the plot? Is it something that's not necessarily popular? Is there something else popular that's just been released around the same time? Is there something wrong with your presentation, your marketing? Are you trying to market it to an audience that it's not for? For example, if you're trying to market a romance that's very, very sweet, but you're trying to market it as a spicy romance book, you're not going to get that readership because they're not getting what they're expecting. So there's a lot of things that you can definitely take a look at and consider. At that point, you can see if there's any steps you want to take, which I will discuss a little bit further on in this video, but maybe there are things that you can definitely fix. If not, that's okay too. And the next thing you can do if your book's not doing so well is that you can tweak it. The beautiful thing about being in self-publishing or indie publishing is the fact that you have control over what you do with your books whenever you want to do them. So if there is something that happens to be wrong with your book or that you would have wished you've done better, you do have time to tweak it and make things a little bit better. First off, one thing I see that's very common is if a book's been out for a while and maybe it was an early book, there are some people who will pull it back down and have it re-edited. If they don't feel that they've put enough work into the editing up front, this is something that might be a bit costly, but might be worth it to fix. The other things that you can tweak, which are a lot simpler and usually free, unless you go for outside help, is tweak your blurb. Yes, you would have to pay to change it on a paperback wrap at this point, but to change it on Amazon or Apple or anything like that does not require any cost. It doesn't require you to take the book down, nothing. It's a very, very simple thing that you can do is to take a look at your blurb and make sure that it's really, really hitting the things that you want it to hit. Do you need to lean more into a trend that's out right now? Are you having the stakes up front? Is it clear to the reader why they should read this book? Try some different things. See if it spurns some of your sales. If it does, fantastic. If it doesn't, you can go back to your original blurb. But this is something that is easy and free to try to see if that's going to help boost your book. The other thing you can definitely tweak is if you're already doing marketing, you might want to tweak how you are marketing this book. Maybe you're going with specific catchphrases as your tagline, or you're using specific excerpts for ads or specific images. Maybe try changing those things up. See if you can get something a little bit more reactive from your audience. Test different things and see if that helps. It may help, it may not, but it's something that's very simple to do. It just really takes your time to be able to do that. The next thing that you can do could be a little bit more costly, but goes into that tweak category. However, it's going to be a little bit more of a change, and that is changing your cover. Obviously, if the book's been out for like a week, you probably don't want to jump on a cover change right away. But if it's been out for a while and you just aren't seeing the results, you might want to consider changing your cover. First off, don't just do it just to do it. There's a lot of books out there that have really great covers that are totally on genre, which are great, but just aren't selling for various other reasons. So don't just change covers to change covers, especially if you are paying a cover artist to create your cover, because that could be hundreds and hundreds of dollars depending on who you get. So you wouldn't want to do this willy-nilly. You're going to want to make sure that this is a really good decision to make. Before I would consider changing a cover, I would probably try to get some feedback from other people, either other writers or target audience, to see if that cover is really hitting where you want it to hit. Also, do your research. Go on Amazon. Look at the categories that your book should be in and the top 100 in that category. Does your cover blend in enough with those books? Obviously, you want to stand out a little bit. You can't be exactly like everyone else, but a lot of covers are similar for a reason. It shows the reader what to expect when they buy that book. So are you fitting in with those reader expectations? If you aren't and you're choosing not to, that's totally fine. There are some really beautiful covers that don't fit into cover expectations and still sell really well. But if you are struggling with sales and this is something that you really want to look into, maybe trying to be a little bit more like covers in your genre could move the needle a little bit more. This isn't a required, this is just a nice to have if this is something you wanted to do. Writers do this all the time as well, even for series or books that sell well. They came out 5 or 6 years ago and the cover is now dated. Trends have changed, things like that. So to breathe new life into that series, whether it was selling well or whether it wasn't, they will consider recovering them and relaunching them. It creates new buzz for the book and it gives it a second leash on life. So this might be something you might consider doing if you really, really want this book to shine. It isn't something that is absolutely necessary, but it is something that you definitely could do to try and boost sales. The next thing that you can try is marketing. If you haven't actually been doing any marketing, you're just using word of mouth, then you could be missing out on some of your audience. Marketing is a interesting choice, however, because you have to really think about where you are in your author career. Can you afford to be paying into paid marketing? Because a lot of the free stuff you've probably already tried, and if you haven't, you really should probably try to exhaust that stuff before you get into paid ads or paid marketing. But if you have paid marketing options, what benefit is that going to get you? If this is your first book, you might not want to throw a ton of money into paid marketing because you don't really have any backlist to support it. So you sell this book, that's awesome. What does the reader have to go to after that? Nothing. There are no books in your backlist for them to keep reading and to keep consuming your products. If you have a larger backlist, it might make more sense to throw more money into paid marketing, because at least if they enjoy this book, you might get a tail of readers that are going to read more of your backlist and is going to definitely help you out and help pay for that marketing. But this is a personal decision that everybody needs to make on their own based on their personal budgets and how much money they're willing to put into this project. So if you aren't doing any paid marketing, maybe it's something to look into. Maybe try something small and see if it moves anything for you. But paid marketing is not a guarantee that your book's going to sell, but it can definitely help you get a leg up. The next thing you can do is try something outside of your comfort zone. If you have been doing the same sorts of things for launches all the time and there's certain things that you've just never tried, maybe give them a shot for the first time. Some people are really uncomfortable with maybe doing blog posts or interviews or something like that. Maybe see if there's an opportunity to try that and see where it goes. If you want to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, you may be able to find readers that you aren't already in your sphere of readership or social media and could give your book that boost that it needs. This obviously is going to take a big leap of faith, but it could be something that could really, really push your sales if you're willing to try. And the final thing I would suggest if your book flops is to cut your losses and move on to your next book. As I said at the beginning of this video, books are immortal, kind of, at this point. They aren't going to go out of print. So just because this book doesn't do particularly well, it doesn't mean that you're not going to write a book or a series of books down the line that are going to bring in a ton of readers. And those readers, after binging through your series, are going to want to read whatever else you put out there. So there's a good chance they could go back to your first book, second book, third book, and read those books to tide them over until the next one comes out in your series, or your next series comes out, or wherever you are in your author career. There is an adage that's very popular. The one thing that sells your book the most is writing the next book. And the reason for that is it creates hype for you. You're creating hype as an author. Yes, it's a new book, but you're creating that buzz around yourself that you have books and that you're interesting. And once a person reads that book, they could go back to your backlist. It does and can rejuvenate life into books that you've released a month ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago, because you have found a new reader who is discovering you for the first time. If your books are good, it doesn't matter if you wrote it 5 years ago or 5 minutes ago. A reader is going to want to read it if they really love your stuff. So, moving on to the next book and taking your time, money, and energy into that new project might be a better way to go. Personally, before you move on, I would take what you found in your analyze stage of looking at why your book flopped and take care of the low-hanging fruit. If there's something that you can easily fix, try that. See if that's going to help before you move on to the next book. It always helps if you sell a few more copies of this one while you're writing the next one. So if you feel that your blurb is a little bit weak, that's an easy and cheap fix. Maybe try doing that. Maybe try a few cheaper paid marketing options and then just move on to the next book. If you've analyzed everything and everything is the way that you want it to be and it's just not selling, sometimes they're just not going to sell. And that's just the reality of publishing. There are so many books for people to buy out there that it means that not every book is going to be popular. Not every book is going to sell thousands of copies. And unfortunately, sometimes that's going to be your book. And knowing when to cut and run will probably be better for your sanity, and you can focus on the new project and take anything that you've learned from project number 1 and focus it into project number 2. If you've received any feedback in reviews or something like that that you find is valuable, you can apply that to your next project and maybe it's going to have a little bit more success than your first one. If you're just starting out, it could take several books before you gain some traction with readers. So sometimes it's okay if your book flops. Just move on to the next one and it's all going to be all right. All right, so those are some suggestions on what you could do if your book does not do as well as you had hoped once it releases. However, there are 3 things that I would suggest that you don't do under any circumstances if you can avoid it. And the first one is don't panic. So if a book doesn't do particularly well, especially if you are a newer author or it's a new genre or something like that, there is the tendency to want to panic because you start second guessing everything. Am I making a mistake? Maybe I shouldn't be a writer. Maybe this isn't the genre for me. Maybe I totally messed this up. Maybe I should quit writing. Maybe this, maybe that, all of those sorts of things. Don't panic. It's really easy to say that, but it's a hard thing to do because you want to be successful and you want things to work out, but when they don't, you automatically just go into this panic mode of why didn't it work? Why don't people want me? Why doesn't anybody want to read this? It's nothing personal. It's a business. It's marketing. It's all of these different things that a lot of it you really don't can have control over. The things you can control are your cover, your blurb, what you do to get it out into the world, and the quality of your book. Those are the only things that you have any sort of control over. Who reads your book? How many people read your book? There's only so much you can do for that. So the first thing you definitely don't want to do is panic because it's going to cloud your thoughts for looking at all of these things objectively and trying to make a decision as to what is the next path for your book, or you as an author if you feel it's time to cut your losses with that book and just move on. The second thing you do not want to do if your book flops is that you do not want to throw good money after bad. So basically what that is the fact that you don't want to just pump a bunch of money into marketing for a book that's not doing well. It could work out in your favor, but the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people who panic when a book doesn't come out. So going back to my first thing, don't panic if your book doesn't work out, but then they feel like, oh, I need to do this and I need to be here. And they get that FOMO, fear of missing out, and they want to pay for all this marketing and they're going to pay for this and PR people and various different things to try to make that book work. You really need to slow down before you start doing that. First off, how much money do you actually have to put behind this book? If you have a lot of expendable income, great. go for it, knock yourself out. But I'll bet you if you had that expendable income on this book, you've probably already put it into your launch. And if you've done that, then it's not there anymore. So don't just be throwing money at it. Don't be charging things up on your credit card just to try and make this book work. Throwing more money at it isn't going to be the answer. It's only going to put you further behind on the next project and the project after that, especially if those sales don't materialize from all of this extra spend. You'd be better off to take some of that money and put it into that next book. Pay for a better editor if that was one of your issues. Maybe pay for some help with your blurb. Buy a better cover if covers are your issue, or find a way to have some extra time to work on your book if that's what you want. Or maybe put that into marketing for book 2 so it has a better chance right off the get-go. There are lots of things that you can put your money into in this business, and unfortunately, sometimes it can be a total money pit. Do not throw money you do not have after a book that is failing, because you were probably just throwing that money away and you are very unlikely to make that back, at least in the near future. You may over the long term, but right away, probably not. And the third thing you do not want to do if your book fails is give up. It's really hard to take the reality that your book isn't selling, that people don't want to read it, or maybe you've had bad reviews on it and that's not helping your sales. It sucks. It hurts, and you may not want to keep going. You do have to do some soul searching in determining if writing is something you want to do, but don't just give up because you had one bad experience. It can take time for you to build a consistent level of sales on every release. Everybody who started out started somewhere. There are so many authors that I read about that I look up to, and if you go back to the beginning of their careers, they'll say, my first book, I sold 40 copies. My first book, I sold 10 copies. Not everyone. Some people do great right out of the gate, and that's awesome for them, but it is not a guarantee for anyone in this business. So going in with lower expectations definitely helps, but remember, don't give up just because you've had one flop. It can get better, and it may get better. And in the end of the day, this one book that flopped may end up being your best seller after you have a few more titles under your name and you've got a little bit more of a readership going on. You never know what's going to happen. So don't give up on your writing and publishing dreams if it's something that's really, really important to you. If you find that you're not cut out for this business, so be it. Not everybody should be or wants to be in writing and publishing. It is definitely not the easy money route, but if you really, really love it, do not give up. So those are my tips on what to do if your book flops. It does happen, it will happen, and it may happen to you. And if you've used any of my tips and you feel that they are useful, or you've got some of your own, make sure you're leaving them in the comments below, as I would love to read them. Thank you so much for joining me, and if you would like to be a subscriber on this channel and find out every time I put up new content, which is typically on Thursdays, make sure you're hitting that subscription bar and the notification bell below this video. While you're down there, make sure you're hitting that thumbs up to let YouTube know this is something worth watching. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you all have a great week.